Barnes Noble Union Square, please give a warm welcome to Colson Whitehead and Miwa Messer.
You know, oh, hello, people in the back row. I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and obviously you know the guy sitting next to me. National Book Award winner, Pulitzer Prize, 2 Pulitzer Prizes. And, you know, reading Colson is always a trip, right? Because you never quite know exactly what you're going to get. But I don't often get to sit down with a dude with that many awards and, you know, so many best-selling books and da-da-da-da. Having watched Cleopatra Jones, Blackula, Poseidon Adventure in 1972, I almost hit an airplane movie, and then I was like, maybe I should dial it back a little bit. And Earthquake, which do not watch that. It's not worth it. Even though he mentions it in the book, don't do it. And I will own it. That was the second time I'd seen it, and I should have known better. So, Colson.
Howdy do. Thanks for coming, everybody.
I didn't even get to the good movies like Serpico or Chinatown. No, I just did the cheese. And again, let me be clear, I was rewatching. Okay, I have no defense here. Absolutely no. I cannot say the dude with the Pulitzer got me to watch. How do we describe them?
Well, I mean, you know, blaxploitations, and there's early 70s disaster movies, but they're all exploitation fare of different kinds, exploiting trends. Mm-hmm. In the 60s, it would have been biker movies, beach movies. Okay. Mid-70s, you get some Supernatural after The Exorcist.
Which I still actually haven't seen because it just freaks me out too much. I can do gross and I can do cheese, and I can't do horror. I can't do actual horror. It's just, don't.
Well, what do you think of Blackula? That's not really horror.
No, that's cheese. I think of that as straight up cheese, but The Exorcist, no, it's not happening. Can't do it. Crime novels, though. Harlem Shuffle, Crook Manifesto. You actually wrote a sequel. You've never done that until this book, right?
No, yeah, I mean, I've never had a character or a world I wanted to revisit before. After Sag Harbor, the novel, I was like, oh, what if I followed him, this teenage character in his 20s, and then the person I was seeing at the time was like, no one wants to read that. And I got kind of depressed. And put that aside. And then with Zone 1, I really, you know, after I finished the book, and I was like, oh, maybe not the main character, but I'll visit the world. There are some supporting characters like the Quiet Storm, this survivor of the zombie apocalypse. But I got distracted. Right. But with this one, I felt, you know, in the middle of the book, I kept coming up with capers and jobs, and so I knew it would be 2 books. And then if you do 2, like what's a twosome? That's not like a thing in a series. So it has to be a trilogy, so it became a trilogy quickly.
Okay, so we meet Ray Carney and his family and his in-laws who drove me around the bend when I was reading Harlem Shuffle, and that's on me, not on them, but Elizabeth's parents, man. So we get the whole world laid out for us, right, in Harlem Shuffle. We're in New York in 59, 61, 64? Okay. You don't actually have to have read Harlem Shuffle to listen in on this conversation we're about to have with Crook Manifesto. And I know a couple of people had asked that through Eventbrite and everything else, and the reality is no. I mean, it's fun if you have, but Crook Manifesto really stands on its own. And now we're in New York in 71, 73, and 76?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Can you talk about New York in the 70s for a second? I can tell some of you probably know what New York in the 70s looked like, but there are some around you who I can guarantee do not. And I know they've been on YouTube, and I know they've seen the footage, but would you set up New York in the 70s?
Well, I was born in 69, so my first memories are of a very dingy, dirty New York. I think there was this atmosphere of fear I sort of internalized. Each time you go out the door, you're engaged in some kind of combat. And it's a perfect, you know, background for Ray Carney. Crime is at an all-time high, and the city is bankrupt. And, you know, in picking 71, 73, and 76, I'm trying to find different moments in the city's history that can make some friction. And so you mentioned Serpico.
Yep.
I was a kid growing up watching matinees on Channel 5 and Channel 9 and Channel 11. And I remember seeing The Taking of Pelham 123 on a matinee, and also Serpico. So it was cool to have this the movie version of this crusading cop's life, and then go back to the original Peter Moss book about him, to go back to the Knapp Commission's report on police corruption. If you know the story of Serpico, he's tattling on his corrupt comrades in the police force, and there's a big task force. And so I find a year, and I try to focus on something that can work for Carney, and then build it out from there and make it realistic and hopefully fruitful.
One of the things I love about both of these books is it's really, you can read them as novellas, right? Both Harlem Shuffle and Crook Manifesto, you can read them as a series of 3 novellas sitting within one book. So here we are, right? And Ray gets pulled back. I don't really want to call it the underworld, but let's say he's shown his little bit of bent side, right? He's a little...
Well, there's that trope in these, you know, in a crime story where somebody wants to go straight, somebody wants to go legit, and then they pull him back in. So it's fun to, you know, see what I want to keep from the tradition and throw out and have fun with.
Because most crime novels don't involve the Jackson 5. I mean, not even Chester Himes, certainly not Iceberg Slim.
There's a lot of pop culture. I mean, that's my bent. And so, you know, hopefully you're picking a reference that can move on different levels. And so in 71, the Jackson 5 are these, you know, supernaturally gifted young kids. But there's a false front, the same way that Ray Carney and other characters have a false front. We know from later revelations that his father's abusing them. We know that Michael Jackson will be abusing kids. And so there is that rift between the face we put out to the world and what's actually happening. And then in the second section, there's a blaxploitation shoot in Harlem. And then I really sort of get my sort of pop culture in and have fun with the genre, and also people like Richard Pryor, who in the early 70s was about to blow up. His concerts were becoming bestsellers, and he's doing blaxploitation movies like The Hit with Billy D. Williams before he gets his sort of later 70s fame. So pop culture is important to me, and then if I can sort of figure out how to weasel it in, I'm really happy.
And the bicentennial.
Well, the idea of ourselves versus the reality. So obviously 1776 and 1976, the bicentennial have different meanings for different populations, white and black, and I have a lot of fun with that.
Okay, so we've set up New York as a character, right? It's not just Ray, it's not just Elizabeth, it's not just May and John, the kids. Pepper's back. I was so happy to have Pepper back. And then you whacked him with a baseball bat. I'm not giving anything away, because Pepper...
Pepper is a sort of older criminal. He ran with Ray Carney's father, who was also a crook. You know, when we first meet him, there's a flashback to World War II. So he's getting a little, you know, a little creaky come the 70s, and doesn't take hits as well as he used to.
But he still takes them. Part of what I love about both of these books, too, is you're talking about class and race and change and masculinity and all of these big sort of serious literary fiction kind of moments in a crime novel. And I love that. I love the idea that we don't have to subscribe, right, to a certain form of storytelling. And you'd been reading Richard Stark. There feels like there's a little Elmore Leonard in this stuff. Yeah, maybe.
Well, I think in humor, I mean, I didn't go back to him, but
right, okay.
I definitely internalized him in the 90s when I was starting to read detective fiction, crime fiction.
Right. So Ray Carney is kind of growing up as New York. I don't want to say New York is growing up, but New York is going through some massive changes.
Well, you know, I mean, New York is a character in the book, and I hate it when people are like, the city is almost a character.
No, it really is.
Like Dublin in Ulysses is almost a character. But I realized halfway through Harlem Shuffle, yes, New York is a character. And the same way that Carney is having his ups and downs, so is the city. From the World's Fair in '64, this time of optimism, to the doldrums of the 70s. And then, you know, there's a third book that'll take place in the 80s, and we come out of the fiscal crisis. But again, at the end of the 80s, there's the height of the AIDS crisis, another Wall Street crash, and the crack epidemic. So I am charting, you know, the ups and downs of Carney's life, but also the city, this other character. And
Gabriel Bump, actually, who's a young novelist I really love. He's got a new book coming out in November, but he compared Harlem Shuffle and Crook Manifesto to August Wilson's Century Cycle. And if you know what I'm talking about, it's the 10 plays that cover Pittsburgh and the Black experience over the course of the 20th century, and they're amazing. If you ever have a chance to read them, please do. And actually, I think it's really accurate. I think it's really, really accurate. You're doing this sort of sweep and scope with jokes, okay, maybe more jokes than August Wilson. For me as a reader, I get to sit with the narrative in a way that I might not necessarily, like it's one thing to see one of the Century Cycle plays on stage, right? It's a really kinetic experience and there's movement and there's dialogue and everything. And you bring it all to a novel.
It's a new venture and challenge. If you pull back, maybe it's not 3 books, but one 1,100-page story, following one character for 30 years. Each novel has 3 stories that come together Voltron style to make a novel. Each novella has a beginning, middle, and end. And if you pull back, Harlem Shuffle is Act 1, and Crook Manifesto is Act 2, and then I'm winding things up in the 3rd book. And so, it is a complicated structure. Once I started a 2nd book, I realized I should probably plot out more and plot the 3rd book. And Harlem Shuffle was at the copy editor, but it was still open for changes, so I was allowed to take things from the 3rd book and the 2nd book and seed them in the 1st book, because I was locked in the house and watching Inception again. And I was like, he's really good at seeding the end in the beginning. And I was like, but you do that too. Maybe you should do that for the whole trilogy. And so I was able to sort of figure out the ending and hopefully plant some seeds in Harlem Shuffles.
Yeah, there were a couple of characters who, when they popped up in Crook Manifesto, Zippo, I'm thinking of, and also Elizabeth's childhood friend. And I will say, when Elizabeth's childhood pal, I had feelings when that guy popped up. But it's nice to sit in this world. Like, obviously, I'm very attached to Pepper. Yes, I'm attached to a gangster. It happens, okay? I mean, y'all read the book, too. But for you, coming back to this world, I still can't get over the fact that you wrote a sequel. You're talking about 1,200 pages in the life of the city, in the life of a man, in the life of a family, in a community. And I'm also hoping you don't do that Peter Matheson thing where he goes back and takes the 3 volumes of Watson's life and then writes the book he actually meant to write the first time. Can we just have
I'm not familiar with that analogy,
okay.
but I won't do that.
Okay. No. Well, the Watson trilogy, does anyone know, am I dating myself? Oh, I'm so dating myself. But the Watson trilogy was Peter Matheson's sort of magnum opus set in Florida. And maybe 10 years after it came out, he just took it all together, rewrote it, and won the National Book Award.
All right, well.
So, but you have one of those already. Wow. Okay, but let's go back to this world for a second, because here you are working with a code, right? Like there's this language of the sort of respectable, I guess upper class, like Elizabeth's parents, right? And then you've got Ray's sort of dad and Pepper and that whole world. Like you're working on 2 levels at any given moment. Right? There's the slightly bent, and then there's the
very
front of it
bent,
all.
the murderers,
I mean,
embezzling some minor pornography versus murder, and
there's a lot happening. But you're not mapping this out on index cards and sticking them on the wall, are you?
No, I used to carry notebooks around, and then I lost one, and I was devastated. I was flying on JetBlue, and I put my notebook into why did I do that? So I got to the hotel. I was like, oh my God! But I have such a great memory. I'm going to recreate everything I put in the notebook. So I got another new one, and I, through a furious act of mental acuity, recreated. And then I went back to the airport the next day, and they'd found the notebook, and I compared the 2, and it was like 10% of what was involved. So now it just goes in the phone, goes in the cloud. Okay. I wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, boy meets girl, it's there.
But how do you build a code for gangsters?
Before I'm a big outliner, and before I'm starting each new section, novella, chapter, I'm figuring out what Pepper's going to do, what Carney's going to do, what are the motivations. And so before I know how they're going to do the fried chicken heist, I know what it means. I know what the heist means to them. So there's a lot of planning. There's some people who are like, the muse comes through the window and guides my hand. But as New Yorkers, we know that the muse is trapped on a 7 train. There's like a track fire. So I have to outline a lot of people in Brooklyn who write, competing for the muse. So.
Well, also crime novels need structure, right? Because otherwise it's just complete chaos. And it's actually a little hard to read when it's that chaotic.
Well, I think you can tell when they're making up as they go along, and it gets really a real drag.
All right, I want to go back to this idea that there's a nobility and a morality to dudes like Pepper and dudes like Zippo and dudes like Ray Carney. They have a code, right? It's almost like this weird knighthood of dudes who do bad things.
Well, that's the Crook Manifesto. You know, what will you do that's within your moral limit, and what won't you do? So there's a character who is burning buildings down for insurance money, and Pepper, our sort of amoral moral center, is like, I'm not going to judge you, but I would never do that. But he will, commit incredible acts of violence and steal various things. But there is this hierarchy of crime, and I think, as I pull back from story to story and from book to book, we're forced to think, how bad is Pepper? How bad is this character compared to these, larger scale crimes?
I'm looking at an Eventbrite question, and I have to say, it's making me laugh. What do you think Ray Carney would be doing if he was coming up in today's world instead of the 70s?
I try to be open and riff in these kinds of situations, but he's so set in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that I have no idea. Sorry. I don't have anything clever there.
I don't really see Ray as a computer guy, so and sooner or later your body gives out. Like we're seeing this with Pepper's got some creakiness, his back is not doing, it's...
Well, I think, I love heist movies like Ocean's 11, but the high-tech stuff I definitely did not want to engage in. It's kind of a cheat. I like the sweaty guys in bad suits and sweat stains, hunkered over the safes, with their stethoscope. So definitely a low technology crime world is what I wanted from the very beginning.
There's more serendipity, I think, too. I mean, if you have a cell phone, right, and you can figure out exactly which turn you were supposed to take, and when you went right, you were supposed to go left kind of thing. The situations that Ray ends up in, certainly in the first novella of Crook Manifesto, Munson's back. You can't have that kind of thing if there's a cell phone in your pocket. You can't have that kind of thing if there's a pager on your hip. Like, you kind of have to be able to float free form as you're going through all of the different stops that they're making.
Yeah, I mean, I think, people who are writing crime and detective and thrillers now have a big sort of problem if they set them in the contemporary moment.
Oh, you know what I wanted to ask you? Did you ever read Bridgett Davis's World According to Fannie Davis? Her mother was a numbers runner in Detroit.
No.
And I meant to ask you that earlier when we were in the green room. I was like, oh, you might want that one. Because I know when you're doing the research, right, there isn't a lot of literature, right? Like, fences don't go out and write their memoirs.
There actually are 2 books, The
seriously?
Fence and The Professional Fence.
Okay, now I know.
Written by a sociologist in the early 70s, and they were really helpful. But there is a lack of fencing literature and also fences in pop culture, and so it was sort of open territory. I always like to find stuff that hasn't been done. My first book's about elevator inspectors. I beat everyone to the punch on that one. And
luckily for us,
there's not a lot of competition for fence literature either, so.
Okay, but fences too tend to be the people who are sitting in the background, or they're not the sexy roles, right?
No, they're definitely the character actor. Yeah. If you look at John Voight in Heat, he plays like a fence fixer.
Oh yeah, that guy.
But they seem to have sandblasted his face. Like no one.
That movie has not aged well.
I still dig it.
I used to love that movie, and I watched it again recently. I forgot Al Pacino kept doing the...
He started getting big in that.
Oh, there was a lot.
Yes,
There was a lot of scenery, and I was like, oh, I didn't remember this part.
Well, the 70s, some of the 70s movies' touchstones are Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon, and he is this really contained actor. Is Al Pacino here? Like, these are I don't want to... I never want to insult anybody. And then he does get bigger in the 90s, definitely.
Didn't he come after Scent of a Woman?
I
don't know which.
So, yes.
One of them fed the other, and I was like,
It was after. Yeah.
Okay. No disrespect, we love Al Pacino, but there are certain performances when you see them on the big screen. So this was a remastered 4K version, and I think that was part of it, where I was like, oh, I don't think I'd ever seen Heat on the big screen until that moment, and I was like, this is a lot.
Yeah, I saw it opening day.
Okay. But masculinity, Pepper's relationship to Ray, Pepper's relationship to the world, Ray's relationship to Elizabeth and the kids who work in his store, right? Freddie's son is now working, his cousin Freddie is now working in the store. And Ray just wants to be dad, and yet...
Yeah, I mean, family is very important to him. It's definitely huge in the Harlem Shuffle, coming from a place of being a real loner and then assembling a family unit, a wife who loves him, having kids and having a nice place to raise them. And then want to have a family business, but do they want to work in the store? Like, they work in the store, but do they want to carry on? Can this family unit make him whole? And then there's Pepper, who is a sort of sociopathic isolate who becomes inducted into Carney's family bit by bit as like an uncle, a weird uncle. What does he see in Carney and the life he's built up? And so I give Pepper, his moment in the sun in the second section, and I get to examine crime and also family and the city and the counterculture through his eyes.
I love the fact that Ray's kids keep calling him Uncle Pepper, and he keeps saying, you have to stop doing that. You just have to stop.
It irks him.
Yeah, and I would call him Uncle Pepper. If I were those kids, I'd be doing the same thing, because they have no idea, right? They're not following him around, watching what he's doing. He's the weird uncle at dinner. But building this community and deciding who comes back from earlier books, right? Like, Zippo was a choice. I happen to love the second section. I happen to love all of the movie stuff. It's very, very funny. I was not thrilled when you brought back the ventriloquist in the club. Can we leave the puppets out of it, please? Am I the only person who's creeped out by ventriloquists? Okay, no. All right, thank you. I get an amen in the back, because I can't do puppets and I can't do ventriloquists. But everything is so clean and so clear and so alive and so corrupt. I mean, not an inch of anything. I mean... No,
if there's an organization or a system, it's probably corrupted in this book. And so I guess that's my point of view, or is that the way the world works? I think it is, but am I supposed to say that out loud, or I don't know.
I sort of feel like for Ray, that's how the world works. I mean, it still strikes me, and having read all of the books that you've written, including Noble Hustle, I have read the poker book. And poker is not my game, which is why I bring up the poker book. It seems like you're having more fun with these books in the writing than maybe you were able to have with earlier. So even The Intuitionist, even the zombie novel, even Zone 1, the zombie novel, it seems like you're looser on the page.
I think, humor is important, I think, in John Henry days in Zone 1.
Yep.
But definitely with the more serious books, Underground Railroad and Nickel Boys, there's not that room. And then I think just built into writing a crime story now, unless it's like super grim, like serial killer thing, like Luther or something, like the fish hook in the eyeball killer, something really incredibly grim and baroque. You have to have fun with it, fun with the stock characters.
Right.
There's a first wave of Dashiell Hammett, and then a 50s, 60s wave of, say, Patricia Highsmith and Chester Himes. When I was starting to write in the 90s, it was a great time to read James Ellroy and Walter Mosley and Elmore Leonard. It's hard to do a crime story without some sort of irony or humor.
Right.
A little bit of a wink. And it's a good opportunity for humor, which is part of my project, and so I feel very good.
Okay, is it Dumas or Dumas?
Well, you're supposed to say, because I do both depending on...
Who's talking?
Yeah,
okay.
So...
Is there a proper pronunciation?
I feel like they would say Dumas.
Okay. So we've got this Dumas club.
It's a hoity-toity men's club for upper-crust black folk.
And again, it just brings me back to this idea that you're running on so many different levels, right? There's the front of this club, which we learn many, many things about. There's the front of Ray just wanting to be a furniture salesman. I think part of him really does actually want to stay straight, and he just can't. But then you've got Pepper, who was never, ever going to be that guy, right? Like, he was just always going to be Pepper.
No, yes, there's no reckoning. I think Pepper's engaged in. He is who he is, this sort of force of nature. So he makes a good foil because everything that's human in other people is this alien thing he's forced to confront. And so it's fun to write that kind of character and point of view. And then also, I think, forces us to consider our own customs and their strangeness.
Can we talk about Ray's ambition and Ray's aspiration for a second? I mean, he really just wants to have a nice life.
A nice apartment. He's a New Yorker, definitely.
Yeah.
And, if he moves to the next nice apartment or nice block, he might be cured.
He just wants a nice life. So why can't he go straight? Does he need to go straight? Does he really need to go straight?
Well, he doesn't in this book.
Well, I know, but you have a third book coming.
Yeah.
I'm worried. I'm worried that we're going to lose Ray's innate Rayness. I mean, he's got a moral code. He wants to do the right thing, but he gets caught up in a lot of stuff.
Well, I think what I'm engaged now, because I'm in the third book, and I know what's happening, the sort of major plot movements. I do have to figure out who he is from where he is in 1959 in the first 10 pages of the first book to who he is in his 50s. His kids are 1 and 2 in the first book, then they're teenagers in the 70s, and then they're out of the nest. He has this nice townhouse in Stryber's Row, but it's empty now because his kids are off. Getting into middle-aged Carney, what does he want? He's achieved success in his legit business and also his crooked business, so who is he? And who is Elizabeth? Elizabeth is also undergoing her generational change in this book. And in the third book, where does she go? Where did she find herself in the 80s? A very smart woman who wants more and not a sort of traditional role. So where does she go? So this is cool to map them and have a credible psychology for all these different characters over 30 years.
And I really like the arc that you gave Elizabeth in Crook Manifesto. But I really, really want to know what's going to happen because I think it could... The way you set up what I think is going to be her story in the third book, I'll be patient, but how much longer do we have to wait?
I want to slow down.
Okay.
Sort of a grind, frankly. I'm hoping this AI thing will catch up and take this whole job out of my hands, but it's not there yet.
There was another audience question just asking, how much of this is like your family's kind of experience, like the stories your parents would tell you, right, about New York when they were young and that kind of thing, and family members and family friends and all of that, and how much of it is just straight up research? I mean, you do a ton of research.
My parents were kind of mum about various things, and so I was researching Harlem Shuffle, and I was like, oh, the Hotel Teresa, I'll use that. Chock full of nuts, I remember Chock full of nuts, I put that in the book. And then I would tell my mother, oh yeah, I'm writing about the Chock full of nuts in Hotel Teresa. And she's like, oh yeah, I went there every day, I worked around the corner. And I didn't realize that I was writing about my parents' Harlem. They were a young couple in the early 60s, raising kids. But it was never, the stories that they told me were not.
Right.
I mentioned Blumstein's, which is a famous department store on 125th Street, and I was like, I'm doing a lot of research, I'm a real writer. And would write the scene and tell my mother, she's like, oh yeah, your dad actually worked there for 2 summers, like during college. So there is a real overlap, and 125th Street is the main drag, that it still is today. Later on, I got some names of well-to-do black folks lived in so-and-so Arms in the late 60s in this building. Parkview Terrace, I think, on 96 on Central Park West was built in the sort of mid to late 60s, and that became a magnet for people going to Upper West Side. But a lot of it is just walking around. Is this where Carney might live, or his office? Is this a good place to dump a body? If you go on the West Side Highway, the 130s, there are 2 elevated sections, West Side Highway and also an elevated Riverside Drive. And beneath it is this whole warehouse district where there's no stores. There's this real sort of factory neighborhood. And that is a perfect place to put someone on ice for 3 days in a hostage situation. So find those places, places I've never walked, and then I investigate, and maybe that's a good stage.
I mean, when you think about how much change we've seen in our lifetimes in New York, it's wild, right? Just the neighborhoods that are gone or the buildings that have gone up, and all of the very high-rise glass buildings that are now around Union Square, it's a trip, and they've all gone up in 20 minutes.
But in 125th Street is definitely, Shake Shack and Gap. But if you go 2 blocks up, it's the townhouses from 150 years ago, and they're still there.
It's wild to see the evolution of New York, right? And to see it, too, on the page like this. And, I mean, I've dipped in and out of the Colossus of New York. You did an essay collection years ago. Almost 20 years ago. Oh, actually, 20 years ago. Wow.
Well, the first time I read here was like 2000. This store was 2001 with Chuck Palahniuk.
Wow. Okay.
I'm still here, bitches. Can't get rid of me.
But I mean, how much of your own experience of New York, outside of the stories you might have heard, how much of your own sense of sort of change and time and age and all of the things that catch up with us when we walk by a storefront that's been 15 different things in 20 minutes, right? How much of that is informing what you're doing?
No, I mean, that's definitely there, and the way Carney sees the city overlaps with the way I see the city, and I think you see the city. I think we all are seeing the city through this lens of change, of who we used to be when we walked down this corner. The last time we were here, this store was this. Right. Now it's that. I wasn't around in '64. I was not very conscious in '73, but I can do New York because, it's still the same city. We're still subject to the same pressures and forces, rich and poor, black and white, in the 50s and 60s and now. And I think, in the Colossus of New York, there's a section about the subway. And I think the things I was trying to capture in that essay were the same in the 30s, the hustle to get to work and being crammed. And they were the same when I wrote it in 2001 and now in 2023. There's an essential character of the city that hopefully I can tap into and capture.
You have an epic playlist that gets sort of mixed around whenever you're working on a new book. Obviously, Jackson 5 on the new playlist.
No? I mean, I have like a master playlist of like 3,000 songs.
Right, okay.
And it's The Clash and John Coltrane and Nina Simone and Daft Punk. Really, the music for the books never overlaps.
Okay.
I did, across 110th Street, Bobby Womack did get inducted into the master playlist. Okay. Because I did go back and watch that movie, Yaphet Kotto, Anthony Quinn, blaxploitation movie. There's a 77 Shaft disco, like 7-minute long version of Shaft by Isaac Hayes. And that was like Underground Railroad. I was listening to that during Underground Railroad. So there's a rift between subject and content.
But there's not necessarily a rift right now between us and the start of the third book. So Colson's going to read a little bit from the new book.
Yes. So the first 4 paragraphs of the new book, I'm only on page 52. And in this one, it's 1981. And Ed Koch is mayor. I remember he used to say, "How am I doing?" I don't remember the exact intonation. I have to research that before the book comes out, but there's time. So it's 1981, and we're coming out of the fiscal crisis. Various municipal and federal interventions are taking us out of the 70s doldrums. In all of Ray Carney's years as a fence, he'd been a reluctant fence and a ruthless fence, at times harried and imperiled by his choices, at other times the embodiment of crooked intelligence. There was only one occasion when he participated in the theft itself, and that was in the summer of 1981, when Uncle Rich came back to town, that bad news time. The city that year was true to his personality, as malformed across the centuries, a monstrous entity powered by innate miseries, operated by brute will, and held together by pluck, fury, and rebar. It had been flat broke, and now clambered determinedly from the crater of debt, one mucky handhold at a time. Crime, in its ingenuity, devised new permutations daily, making every citizen a victim or a witness. New arrivals poured in hourly, as if there was room, multiplying the local varieties of sadness and perseverance, and outnumbering those who'd scurried to the suburbs or fled their last humiliation. It was dirty and sick and plain-spoken in its threats. "How am I doing?" the mayor asked on his rounds, barking like one of the mangy seals installed at the decrepit and neglected Central Park Zoo, a real dump. It was his trademark. Everybody needs a gimmick. "How am I doing?" The same as everyone else, tired, banged up, but staggering forth somehow. As for Ray Carney, he was a son of his city, enduring his ration of misfortunes and managing to engineer a few reversals. The day the Uncle Rich mess came to a head, Tuesday the 16th of June, was already out of the ordinary in that Carney had a notable appointment. An interview with Sterling Quality, the monthly magazine of the Sterling Furniture Company. Carney had sold their products since he first opened his doors to budget-conscious Harlemites of contemporary sensibility and taste, to bright-eyed couples who strained cheerfully under the monthly payments, to geezers who set themselves adrift in living rooms on new recliners. Now, the company had chosen him as Northeast Regional Dealer of the Month, August. Carney jumped up and almost knocked over his coffee when he got the call. Across a lifetime, a man cultivates a number of secret wishes that he dare not share with the world. Precious things too delicate to exist outside the safe pastures of his mind. To see his name flow and curl in the dignified typeface of the Sterling Furniture House magazine? It was a dream he'd held close for decades. He and Elizabeth celebrated with a dinner at this French joint off Lex, where the two tiny portions coiled on the big plates in insolent triumph.
Oh, please. I get it. I get that you want to slow down a little bit, but oh man, we're going to have to be patient. We're going to have to be so patient. But it will be worth it, as always. But I do have one tiny question. You're not going to do that thing where you slide in another book that you weren't planning on writing while you were writing the thing you were actually meaning to write.
No, I can only do one thing at a time.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, I'll sit quietly. I'll sit quietly. I can wait. Colson Whitehead, thank you so much.
Thank you, Miwa. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's very sweet of you.
Thank you all for joining us.
Take care.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.